This is ChangeMakers with Katie Goar, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
This week's ChangeMaker is someone who didn't set out to create a national nonprofit or change the lives of thousands of individuals, but here she is doing just that. It all started with a simple act of kindness towards a friend in need. And in 2009, Treger Strasberg had a chance encounter that changed her life forever, and then led her to create Humble Design, a national nonprofit and worldwide movement that embraces empathy for others. Treger, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start at the beginning and talk about the moment that changed your life nearly 15 years ago.
I was brought up in a household in East County of San Diego, and I had limited access to nonprofits. I was a Girl Scout, which, if you know me, is a little bit laughable, but I was a Girl Scout and went to food banks, but I had an opportunity to move to Detroit in 2008. My husband got a job there. I was in advertising and graphic design. And I decided to volunteer at a nonprofit there while I had my two kids in daycare and do their graphic design and advertising for them. I became close with the woman who ran the front desk. She was always just like her style was very similar to mine. She had kids the same age as mine. We talked during our coffee breaks and our lunch breaks. And then one day at our lunch break, she was being very quiet. And I said, "Hey, what's going on? I'm doing all the talking today." And she said, "Well, I'm exhausted. The homeless shelter that we are in, you can't get a lot of sleep at night. It's really loud." And my instant reaction was like, "Oh, you're doing an experiment or you're volunteering and you're going to this homeless shelter." And no, it took me a full a couple of minutes to realize that she and her kids were homeless. And I think that one moment just shifted my entire life view. I had never sat across from anyone who was experiencing homelessness. And so I tried to hear her story and listen to how this could have happened. And she has a full-time job and what led to it. And what I realized in that moment is that homelessness isn't what I think it is. And that education was really swift for me in that moment. When she was able to find housing, and then I went to go visit her because I was so happy and excited for her. I think that moment I walked in, I kind of expected it to be almost like camp. I tried to think back to that moment of when I walked into her house, that there was going to be beds and a dresser and some form of kitchen items. And when I walked in, her and her children were making nests on the floor of where they were going to sleep with their winter coats. And what I realized again was that my privilege, basically up until that point, had not let me even explore the idea that she had left everything behind when she entered a homeless shelter. So I very much was affected by that moment. And I cried, honestly, the whole way home back to my house. And then I proceeded to empty out every single thing in my house that I wasn't using. And then I went to my neighbor's house and I asked them, "Hey, there's this friend of mine. Do you have anything that you are not using and that you could donate to her?" And then I stopped people in the grocery line and then at the pickup for my kid's school. But because she was my friend and I just didn't want to throw anything at her, I picked and chose the stuff that she wanted to see in her house. She loved the color red. Her kids love musical instruments. So I curated all the stuff. And then when it was finished 6 weeks later, it looked like a home that reflected her and what she would want her home to be. And I think that now I'm not going to yada yada over the last 14 years, but I think that when we furnish for homes now, 14 years later, it is the exact same process that I did for my friend, which is approach their home with dignity and empathy from their point of view rather than what we think they should have in their home.
I'm hearing you describe this, and it's just this cycle of shock almost and awareness. But what is so unique is how you transition to recognizing her, acknowledging her, and then really rallying for her needs. And the way you looped in the community is even better, or a network, and built that network. So that obviously was such a turning point for you mentally. And then how did you then fast forward to your nonprofit?
So I quickly became known as the furniture lady in Michigan. I had been there for 6 weeks, but people were dropping things off at my house. And I would pull into my driveway and there would be a crib. And then one day I drove home and there was a full sectional couch on my front lawn. And I realized that something had to be done. So what I did was I started calling around to the shelters in the area, and there are some very wonderful, very prominent shelters in Detroit. And I said, "Hey, this is all the stuff that people have given me with the intent that it's going to go directly to a family in need. They do not want it to be resold. They do not want it to be thrown away into some hole. Can you help me connect with an organization that would give this to people who really need it?" And all 9 phone calls, the people on the line, the social workers on the other end of the line said, "That doesn't exist, but it would really be great if it did." And sometimes the social workers get together and have a GoFundMe to raise money for a mattress. Sometimes they're able to give them a couple of pots and pans from like a closet that they have at the nonprofit. But really, people are moving into um, housing after experiencing being unhoused, and they have nothing, and they're sleeping on the floor. And I had never intended at that point to ever start a nonprofit. That was never my life goal. But I think that you have a few moments in your life where you have an opportunity, there's a fork in the road. And I realized at that point in advertising, what was missing for me was I never had the choice to take my advertising skills and use it for something that would be a benefit to my neighbors and the world. And I know that's a lofty goal, but I really did remember this moment as like, all right, let's do this. You have this choice. And I said, all right, I guess I'm going to start a nonprofit. I know nothing. I didn't even know what a 501c3 was at that point. But I started slow. We started small. We got a little warehouse. We did one house every 6 weeks. And then I had another pivotal moment where we were a year in and we had a pipeline of referrals coming in from social workers. And we had over 100 families on the waiting list, which means over 400 people, give or take, that were sleeping on the floor that I couldn't help. Doing one house every 6 weeks was, to me, almost more torturous than not doing it at all. So my husband and I sat down and we said, well, we can invest our money into our 401ks and we can invest our money into the stock market and we can grow our wealth, or we can invest our money into something that makes the world a better place. And maybe the dividends won't be the cash that we need to, that we were, hoping to get in the market, but our dividends will be um, that we can put our heads on the pillow at night and sleep very soundly, knowing that we're helping our community. So we made an investment and then we grew the organization. Eventually, we were doing one a week, which was pretty incredible. And then we had a moment where we had a video that went viral. We were on like the Today Show, and we just like had one of those weird moments where we film families that are really excited to tell their story, and not, of course, the ones that do not and want some privacy. But we had filmed a family who really wanted to tell their story, and the video went viral because the little boy cried at the sight of his first bed. And so then we opened up in Chicago because we had such a great outpouring of support at that point. And then we opened up in Seattle and San Diego and Cleveland. And now really what's happened is that we're able to do 13 homes a week across the country. And we do every home the same way we did my first client's home, which is we go and we ask them what they'd like to see in their home, what their year has been like, if their kids have asthma, if they're readers. And we not only provide the furniture, but we provide everything, the artwork on the walls, the framed family portraits, the kitchen items, the extra linen, the towels, the bathroom items, sanitary kits, like cleaning kits, everything that goes in your home goes in our home, including closet and organization. And what happens when the family comes home and we invite them home, which is, like this move, this bus moment, is that they feel listened to, they feel proud of their home, and they feel like their community actually is welcoming them, which I think is a big part of what we do.
What are you hearing in the voice or in their own words? Like, what do they say? Because there's such a stigma with poverty discrimination. So what are they saying in their own words when they move into a house and then they have the tools to succeed?
So there's a big difference between our first meeting and then the reveal day, as it was called. So our first meeting, there's a lot of like downcast eyes, a lot of apologies about maybe the neighborhood or maybe the state of the place or maybe their lack of seating. Sometimes when we meet them for the first time, we sit on the floor. And so there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of feeling that they have to hide or they have to cover up the difficult parts of their story. But one of the things that we and our designers are trained to do is to sit down with trauma informed care as part of our background and say, it's okay. I see you and it's been a tough road and this is really hard and I'm proud of you for getting this far. And then we can dream together. And a lot of people say, parents will say, I only want a bed for my kids. You don't worry about me. I'm fine. Because they think that we're going to mete out our services in tiny little doses. And they don't expect much. It's been the worst year of their life, if not, years plural. And everything has been a disappointment. So they don't want to seem too greedy and they don't want to ask for too much. And then there's the day when they come back and they see the house and they walk in and we ask them to leave for the afternoon. It takes us one full day with volunteers to furnish the entire place. And when they come home, it is such an overwhelmingly sense of relief and joy. And the sitting down at the edge of a bed where a mom kind of just sinks in and starts crying or takes a deep breath. And then the eyes cast upward and the shoulders are back and the chin is up and they start making future plans of here's who I'm inviting over, here's a sleepover I'm going to have. We've been invited back for Thanksgivings and and the sense of that this belongs to them and that this is their home. And what I've heard from families later that we've gone back to interview is that it changes the mindset of day-to-day survival to long-term planning and that when they felt invisible they felt seen with this process. So we had a TV show for a minute, and we were filming one woman who ran outside to her friend who was slowing down in the car to see what was going on. And she leaned in the window and she was still mic'd for TV and she yelled, they just make me feel so beautiful and so seen. And that, I think that actually hurts my heart that that was her reality before we came there.
This is so beautiful and inspiring, yes. And it's such a magnitude of need. Give us a glimpse of what kind of numbers are we talking about for homelessness? Like you're moving in 13 homes a week, but I'm sure that is just a dent in what is needed. And I don't want to take away from the 13, but I want people to understand the scope of what's going on here in these communities.
Absolutely. And I will tell you the 13 homes a week is proof of concept. We need to be doing 400 homes a week.
Good point. Yes, yes.
It is just a proof of concept so people can see that what we're doing not only helps people empathize with homelessness, but our numbers are actually stopping the revolving door of people who get into housing that go back into a homeless shelter. And it surprisingly happens more than you would think. People think that the end of the cycle is a home or four walls and a roof, and it is absolutely not. People fall back into homelessness after they get housing at an alarming rate. And here's what I will say about what we know about homelessness in the United States is that we don't. We don't gather data correctly. We undercount on purpose. And we really don't quite understand the tsunami of what is about to happen in this country with homelessness. We count people one night a year on the coldest night of the year. We don't go into abandoned homes. We don't go in to see who's doubled up. We don't really understand. So HUD estimates that we have about 500,000 homeless people in the United States, but our schools are reporting 2.5 million homeless children every year. So the math is really wrong. And when the math is wrong, it's impossible to plan on a governmental level or even with NGOs, nonprofits, it's impossible to plan to solve the problem when we can't even look at the problem honestly. And I feel very strongly about this clearly. I will say that the wealth disparity in this country right now is larger than it was right before the French Revolution. And when you understand that you're only supposed to spend 1/4 of your income on rent, and most people are spending 80 to 90% of their income on rent, And there's an impossible hill to climb for home ownership. And lots of corporations are buying up single family homes and then raising rents on people. I think the consolidation of wealth in this country is causing a problem with homelessness that we are ill prepared and ill equipped to deal with. The program that Humble Design has piloted basically needs to be installed in every community in the United States to keep people housed once they leave a homeless shelter. But I will say it's a tsunami that even this program won't be able to tackle if we don't all work together to really look at it honestly.
And what you're mentioning here is really a single point of failure if we are not addressing the true scope of the need. Is it because we're afraid to find out exactly how many people are out there and children? Or is it just a bureaucratic concession of the statistics? Do you want to speculate why we don't really have a good grasp on the need?
It is really important to Americans to be proud of America. Just like it's important to our clients to be proud of their home, we want to be proud of the country that we live in. We want to be proud of the taxes that we pay, and we have it in our head that we're the greatest country in the world. Well, it would be a really devastating blow to the citizens of the United States to know that there's 10 million people who are coming down the homeless pipeline, more than any other developed country in the world. That would be a very difficult pill to swallow, in my opinion. And I don't think there's any government impetus to actually spread that number around. It doesn't benefit anybody in power. And the mental illness aspect of homelessness is also what we see. So people drive around and they're just like, "Oh my gosh, it's getting worse. I see so many mentally ill people on the street, and they don't, they can't be housed and they can't be rehabilitated." And they don't want to look at the fact that we eliminated every single mental health institution under Ronald Reagan in this country. And so I think that it's a pride issue. I think it's a reality issue that's really hard to look at when you want to maintain that pride in where you live. But I also think that if we don't start asking ourselves those tough questions about the reality of our situation, it's just going to get worse.
There's also an added layer of complexity of that rent burden and access to supply that is also driving some of these underlying issues. And the more we dig, the more we realize we're just hitting the bare minimum when it comes to providing some of that transitional or permanent housing or Section 8 or whatever your delivery of affordable housing, which is one of the major reasons I actually have you on this podcast, is because what you're doing is providing such a stabilizer. I read that 30% of families return to a shelter system after finding a home, but in your program or through your nonprofit, less than 1% of families who have been helped by Humble Design return to homelessness. So why is that?
That's a great question. We're very interested in the data. Like I said, I think one of the issues is that we're not collecting reliable data. So it was very important from the beginning of Humble Design to take that on. We are interacting with homeless families in 5 states in this country, which is also unusual to be gathering statistics in 5 different states. And what we found is that our families stay in the homes after we provide this sense of dignity and empathy and pride in your home, because when things get tough, they reach out for help because it's important for them to stay. So if they're falling behind on their rent or if they lose their job, they reach out for different levels of assistance because it's really important for them to fix that piece of the puzzle so they can stay. When we have victims of domestic violence, it's very common for a domestic violence victim to return to their abuser if they don't have beds or if they don't have a table, because there's pressure with, especially if you have children, to say the abuser has all the creature comforts and it would be much easier if I were to just go back. I don't want to see my children suffer. I don't want to suffer. I'll just go back. Well, our families are very much a large portion of our families are domestic violence victims. And so what we've heard anecdotally is, I don't need to go back. I'm proud of where I live. I can stay here. Or the sink breaks. I will call my landlord and have him come over and fix it because this is my house and I want to stay here. Now, I don't know if we have the right numbers to prove out that dignity and empathy and pride actually make a difference, but there are studies that do prove that when you have pride and when you feel dignified in your surroundings, it improves your mental health, it improves your stability, and it improves your ability to look at your surroundings as permanent rather than temporary. And that mind shift, I think, is where the intersection of humble design and the solution cross.
In the situation you described, I can envision a lot of people who are no longer provision dependent, and you've established a platform. They don't feel guilty about not being able to provide and then forcing that cycle to where they go back to what they had, because in their minds, what they had at least provided some base level. And so you are equalizing that and really filling that gap, more than just making the house look nice, but you're truly getting to that stabilizer for them in their current day setting. And they're not even having to look back to say, well, provisions were better under the prior arrangement. That is true power for the individual who is in that domestic situation, and then the children. Do you have statistics that talk about, we mentioned here that less than 1% of families return to homelessness. Do you have other analysis or statistics from some of those success metrics like education or job, income, or whatever the success is defined like?
So that is absolutely what we're digging into. Basically, we have gone back and asked our families, are you in the same place? Do you have the same furniture? And so when we start asking other questions like, has your life improved? Have you been able to obtain higher level of employment? All of those questions are dramatically better than where they were before. And so we've been asking a lot of mental health questions, and then in the future, we're putting together a more robust data set that we don't have at our fingertips right now. But all of the mental health questions that we ask are because I think that is where we're headed with this, is that if we pay attention to the mental health aspect and how, like you said, how you view yourself within the community, you start to mirror that you are part of the middle class and you do have dignity and pride, and you're not as ashamed of your surroundings or your story, and how you view yourself and how you wake up in the morning and what that does to your mental health and your planning. I think that's where the data is going to be astounding. When we start to look at, so we've done homes for over 8,000 individuals at this point. And when we get those data sets back, I'm sure that we'll all agree that education and good night's sleep, all those things are going to improve the day-to-day lives. Clearly, staying housed is going to improve day-to-day lives. But anecdotally, we have families who say, I've had my kid in 6 different school districts. This is the first time I've been able to stay in one area for as long as I have. I've made friends with my neighbors. I'm more involved with my community, my churches, my synagogues, but also my son has been diagnosed with profound hearing loss, which we didn't stay in one community long enough for him to make community with his teachers who realized that he had hearing loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how to quantify those things, but we're going to do our best to try. And I think it's really going to be an amazing data set to look at, because even just looking at a good night's sleep and what a mattress does for someone, or having a homework station, or having a lamp to do homework by, how do you really quantify that?
You guys are so much more than furniture, and you're so much more than the furniture lady, as you mentioned. This really is a deeper level of understanding the gaps that you are filling, and it's so important. And I want to get into your reach next, but we have to take a break. Coming up in the second part of my talk with Treger Strasberg, the founder and CEO of Humble Design, Treger shares the inspiration for changing her organization's motto.
We changed our tagline to Togetherness to End Homelessness because we realized it's not just a service we're providing for our clients. It's not just furniture. We're providing a service for our donors who want to be more engaged and feel helpless when they look at the homeless problem and don't know how to help.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Goar. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.